She vanished in less than 30 seconds, and for 22 years, no one knew if little Amelia was alive or buried under the secrets of her own town. But here's the question that still haunts everyone who remembers that night. How does a 7-year-old child disappear from her own backyard without leaving a single trace? Tonight, we follow a trail that was ignored, hidden, and deliberately erased. A trail that will lead us to a truth no one was prepared for. Because sometimes the people we search for the longest are found in the last place we ever look. Welcome to Silent Case, where every whisper, every clue, and every forgotten shadow has a story to tell. On a warm summer night in 1999, Amelia Thompson vanished from her backyard. She was never seen again until 2021. The Thompson household had been ordinary in every sense. A small 2-story home on Maple Street. Windows glowing warmly as the sun dipped behind the trees. Laughter spilling from the kitchen where Amelia's mother, Carol, prepared dinner. Amelia, just 7, had golden hair that caught the fading light, freckles dusting her cheeks like morning stars, and a curiosity that often led her to wander too far into the neighborhood. That evening, she had been chasing fireflies across the yard, her small hands cupped to catch the elusive sparks, her giggles mingling with the soft hum of cicadas. Her parents had been preoccupied, discussing the day's errands, unaware that Amelia had slipped behind the lilac bush near the garden gate. When Carol called for her to wash up for dinner, her voice carried an edge of impatience. But when there was no response, a pang of worry settled over her chest. Pushing back the screen door, she found the gate ajar. The latch, normally secured, swung loosely in the summer breeze. On the porch lay Amelia's favorite doll, its button eyes staring blankly at the night. The familiar muddy footprints that led from the garden to the edge of the yard ended abruptly near the tree line, as if the earth itself had swallowed the child whole. Panic spread quickly. Carol's husband, Mark, rushed in the garage, voice rising with alarm. Neighbors were alerted, doors opening to reveal faces etched with concern. Calls were made, frantic and trembling, first to friends, then to the local police. Officers arrived, flashlights cutting through the twilight, questioning neighbors, tracing footprints, shining their beams into the darkened yard. Every corner was checked, every alley peered into, yet Amelia had disappeared as if she had been erased from the world. Her laughter, once a constant under the summer sky, now seemed like a distant echo. In the following hours, the search expanded. Patrols combed the nearby woods, calling her name until throats ached. Flyers were printed in haste, pictures of her freckled face plastered on lampposts and telephone poles. The air, once warm and calm, became thick with anxiety, the neighborhood holding its collective breath. And then a neighbor emerged from the fog of their own yard, voice shaking. They had seen a shadow near the woods, moving quickly and deliberately, vanishing before they could approach. No one could tell if it was Amelia or someone else entirely. The night closed in with uncertainty. Amelia was gone. The gate remained open, her doll abandoned, and the footprints faded into nothingness. In that quiet suburb, the first threads of mystery had begun to weave themselves, threads that would not be untangled for over 2 decades. By dawn, the neighborhood had transformed. What had been a quiet suburban street tonight before was now a flurry of activity, urgency radiating from every corner. Search parties formed spontaneously, neighbors with flashlights and baseball caps, children reluctantly pulled from school to help, local volunteers scanning the tree line and nearby alleys. Amelia's disappearance had struck at the heart of the community, leaving a palpable tension in the air, thick as the morning mist clinging to the hedges. Carol and Mark Thompson moved through the chaos and the haze, their grief alternating with frantic hope, voices trembling as they called her name over and over, praying for a reply they feared would never come. Sheriff Daniels, a man with graying hair and a reputation for calm authority, took charge. He moved methodically through the street, cataloging evidence and questioning those who might have seen Amelia last. Every account, no matter how small, was noted. A glimpse of movement behind a fence, a flash of color near the corner store, a fleeting shadow by the woods. Volunteers traced her muddy footprints from the previous night, hoping they might lead somewhere, anywhere, but the trail dissolved into the undergrowth, leaving only uncertainty. Every path they followed seemed to end in silence. Television crews arrived mid-morning, cameras capturing the worried faces of neighbors and the frantic gestures of the Thompsons. Flyers with Amelia's smiling face were distributed, pinned to lampposts, taped to shop windows, each copy a silent plea for information. Word spread quickly. "Have you seen this girl?" The community watched, hearts heavy, as if everyone bore some shared responsibility, powerless to undo the night that had stolen her from them. As the hours passed, subtle details emerged. A neighbor remembered a figure lingering near the woods the previous evening, indistinct but deliberate. Another recalled hearing a strange vehicle idling near the cul-de-sac at an unusual hour. Each recollection added weight to the growing tension, but none yielded the clarity investigators sought. Carol held the doll tightly, tracing its seams as if it could whisper the secrets of her daughter's disappearance. Mark scanned the surrounding trees repeatedly, unwilling to accept that Amelia might have vanished completely. By late afternoon, the search expanded into nearby woods and the small park at the edge of town. Volunteers moved in coordinated lines, eyes trained on the ground, scanning for even the smallest clue. The shadow reported the night before lingered in everyone's memory, unconfirmed but haunting, a dark shape at the periphery of the investigation. In that moment, the search had become more than a desperate effort. It had transformed into an urgent plea for answers, a community united by fear and hope. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long, uncertain shadows across the yards, everyone understood. Amelia was still out there, and the questions raised that morning were only the beginning. Weeks turned into months, and the initial flurry of activity that had gripped the neighborhood slowly dissipated. The search parties disbanded. Volunteers returned to their lives, and the cameras that had broadcast Amelia's disappearance receded into the background. Yet for the Thompsons, time offered no relief. Every day was a mirror of the last. Empty chairs at the dinner table, unmade beds, and the faint, haunting echoes of a child who no longer walked the halls of their home. Carol would stand by the window, her eyes tracing the tree line where the shadows had lingered, willing herself to believe that Amelia could still appear at any moment. Mark's hand shook as he held the discarded doll, now faded and weathered, a fragile symbol of a life suspended in uncertainty. Sheriff Daniels and his team continued their work in muted fashion, combing through witness statements and reviewing the last traces of evidence. Yet each lead seemed to unravel under scrutiny. Blurry photographs that revealed nothing, second-hand reports that contradicted one another, and footprints that had long since washed away in summer rains. As the weeks grew into months, the case began to settle into the quiet, cold spaces reserved for unsolved mysteries. Files were cataloged, assigned a dormant status, and labeled with the words every investigator fears. No further leads. The town adjusted, unwillingly but inevitably, to the absence of the girl whose laughter had once colored its streets. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones when her name came up, glances flicking to the Thompson house with a mixture of pity and fear. Some children avoided the empty lot where she had been last seen. Adults avoided the story altogether, leaving the parents to wrestle alone with the gnawing emptiness that settled over them like dust in an unused room. Every photograph, every toy left untouched, became a reminder that the world had moved on, while Amelia's presence remained frozen in time. In quiet moments, Carol reread the flyers and clutched the small, faded bracelet that had never left her bedside table. Mark would sometimes wander into the woods where the shadow had been reported, hoping to see her silhouette among the trees, only to find the undergrowth still and silent. The detectives who had once chased leads tirelessly now filed their reports away, the case a somber addition to a stack of unresolved mysteries. Yet even as the file closed, a subtle unease lingered in the corners of the investigation. Something had been overlooked, or perhaps deliberately ignored. A photograph forgotten in the evidence locker, a statement never fully recorded, a hint of a detail too small to matter at the time. And in that quiet tension, the first threads of the story yet unfinished began to twist. Threads that would not unravel until decades later, when the past demanded to be seen again. In the spring of 2021, 22 years had passed since Amelia Thompson vanished. The quiet suburb that once buzzed with frantic searches had settled into the rhythm of ordinary life, though the memory of the little girl lingered like a shadow over Maple Street. Carol and Mark Thompson had aged visibly. Their faces bore lines carved by sleepless nights, by hope deferred and grief prolonged. Yet the embers of determination still glowed quietly within them. They kept every photograph, every drawing, every toy Amelia had left behind, as if preserving a fragment of her presence could, somehow, summon her home. The cold case unit at the county police department had recently been restructured with new technology and forensic methods offering possibilities unimaginable in 1999. Detective Laura Hayes, recently assigned to the reopened file, approached the case with meticulous precision, scanning the yellowed reports, combing through interviews, and cross-referencing old leads against new databases. To her, Amelia's disappearance was not just a statistic. It was a puzzle, a story frozen in time that demanded to be told fully, from first whisper to final answer. The photographs, once dismissed as inconclusive, were digitized and enhanced. Footprints, faintly visible in the old crime scene photos, were analyzed with tools capable of reconstructing even the most weathered impressions. Every fragment of evidence became a thread that could unravel the mystery. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing archived evidence, Detective Hayes discovered a dusty cardboard box labeled simply, Amelia Thompson, Personal Items. Inside lay remnants of the child's world, a crumpled drawing, a small comb, and most strikingly, a bracelet with faint smudges of what appeared to be fingerprints. The bracelet had been photographed in 1999, but had never been thoroughly examined. Hayes recognized immediately that this object, overlooked for decades, could offer the first tangible lead in years. News of the reopened investigation rippled quietly through the community. Former neighbors remembered the shadow seen near the woods, while others recalled forgotten details, fragments of memory now sharpened by the passage of time. Even the retired Sheriff Daniels agreed to meet with Hayes, revisiting every decision, every report, every note once filed away. Slowly, a narrative began to emerge from the dust of old files, whispers of truth long buried beneath years of assumption and resignation. And yet, even with this discovery, the path forward remained uncertain. The bracelet was a clue, yes, but one that begged more questions than it answered. Who had held it? Where had Amelia been taken? And why had this evidence remained hidden for so long? In the Thompson home, Carol clutched the bracelet as though it were a fragile lifeline, while Mark's eyes scanned the horizon beyond their yard, silently hoping that the years had not eroded the possibility of reunion. For the first time in over 2 decades, hope stirred, fragile, trembling, but undeniable. The bracelet lay in the evidence locker like a small, silent witness, unassuming yet charged with decades of untold history. Detective Hayes handled it with care, noting the scuffs along its edges, the faded engraving that spelled Amelia's name, and the smudges that might be fingerprints, remnants of a moment frozen in 1999. It was astonishing how an object so ordinary could suddenly carry the weight of an entire life lost. In that simple loop of metal, she sensed the first tangible connection to Amelia herself, a bridge across 22 years of silence. The bracelet, once overlooked, now demanded attention. It had spoken through its presence alone, signaling that the case was far from finished. Hayes called in a forensic team to examine the bracelet. Each smudge, each scratch, each tiny indentation was cataloged meticulously. Fingerprints were run through modern databases, revealing partial matches that had been impossible to analyze 2 decades earlier. The bracelet's discovery breathed new life into the investigation, turning stale files into active leads. Detective Hayes felt a quiet thrill, the kind born not of triumph, but a first glimmer of possibility. For the Thompsons, the bracelet represented more than evidence. It was proof that Amelia had not been forgotten, proof that she had left a mark, however faint, upon the world. Carol Thompson, when shown the bracelet, could scarcely speak. Her hands trembled as she traced the delicate engraving, eyes misting with years of sorrow. Mark stood nearby, rigid with tension, silently urging hope to take root without shattering under the weight of old fear. For them, the object was more than metal and lettering. It was Amelia's echo, a remnant of her laughter and her presence that could no longer be conjured but now demanded recognition. The discovery also renewed attention on the neighborhood and surrounding areas. Hayes revisited the woods where the shadow had been reported all those years ago, piecing together patterns that might have been overlooked. Witnesses who had been reluctant or forgotten now offered fragments of memory, a vehicle parked at odd hours, a figure glimpsed briefly near the Thompson yard, voices in the dark that had seemed inconsequential at the time. Each recollection, paired with a bracelet, hinted at a story emerging from the fog of years. Even as investigators followed these tenuous leads, the bracelet's significance remained enigmatic. It confirmed Amelia's presence somewhere unknown, yet offered no answers about the people responsible or the circumstances that had kept her hidden for so long. The mystery deepened, but the discovery had set a chain of events in motion. Somewhere, hidden beneath layers of time, a truth waited to surface. And in the Thompson home, as Carol placed the bracelet carefully into a small velvet box, she whispered a prayer into the quiet evening, unaware that the first steps toward reunion had already begun. The bracelet had stirred more than hope. It had awakened memories long buried. Detective Hayes began revisiting witnesses whose statements had been recorded in 1999, seeking clarity in voices that had grown quieter with time. Some recollections were vague, blurred by decades of forgetfulness. Others struck with uncanny precision, as if the shadows of that night had etched themselves indelibly into memory. A former neighbor recalled seeing a man pacing near the Thompson property, his gaze fixed and deliberate, the night Amelia vanished. Another mentioned a small, unfamiliar vehicle parked on a side street, its license plate only partially remembered, but enough to warrant renewed investigation. Each fragment of truth felt like a shard of glass, sharp, revealing, but capable of cutting if handled carelessly. Old photographs and reports were unearthed, dusted off and scanned for details previously overlooked. A sequence of images captured from a grainy security camera now showed a fleeting figure at the edge of the Thompson yard. Indistinct, yet undeniably present. Combined with the bracelet, these fragments began to suggest that Amelia's disappearance had not been random, but carefully orchestrated. Patterns emerged where none had existed before. The timing, the routes, the people nearby. Hayes traced these hints like a detective threading a needle through decades of darkness, each discovery illuminating only part of the tapestry. The Thompson family, though desperate, remained cautious. Carol revisited Amelia's room nightly, laying out her old toys and drawings, seeking answers in the familiar objects she had long held sacred. Mark pored over police files, connecting the inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed. A witness statement change, a lead never followed, a line of inquiry abruptly ended. They realized the truth had always been there, fragmented and obscured, waiting for someone willing to look beyond the surface. As Hayes delved deeper, contradictions surfaced. Witnesses contradicted each other. Timelines shifted. Statements previously dismissed as irrelevant took on new weight. A retired teacher, once asked casually about Amelia, now recalled subtle oddities in the girl's last days. Fleeting interactions, fleeting hints of fear, gestures that had seemed insignificant at the time. Each recollection was a small piece of a larger puzzle, a mosaic of suppressed truths. By the close of the day, the investigation had expanded in unexpected directions. Every fragment uncovered raised more questions than answers, yet for the first time in decades, a coherent thread was beginning to form. Somewhere within these pieces lay the story of what had happened to Amelia, and perhaps where she might be found. And as night fell over Maple Street, Detective Hayes sat in the quiet of her office, staring at the scattered fragments of evidence. The mystery had deepened, the stakes sharpened, and one undeniable certainty remained. The case was far from over. Detective Hayes leaned over a stack of old case files, the paper brittle beneath her fingertips. Each folder was a relic of a time when technology had been rudimentary, and memories were the only threads investigators could follow. Many pages were blacked out, redacted in thick ink, the omissions glaring against typed words. Names, addresses, and small but critical details had been deliberately erased. At first, it seemed like careless bureaucracy, but as she compared reports, a pattern began to emerge. Certain lines of inquiry were truncated, leads abruptly abandoned, and notes from officers left unfinished. The silence in those files spoke louder than any recorded statement. Among the redactions, Hayes discovered inconsistencies that hadn't been apparent in the first review. A neighbor's statement describing a suspicious car was marked irrelevant, though the same vehicle appeared in another witness's report. A memo hinted at an informant with knowledge of Amelia's disappearance, but the details were entirely obscured. These omissions suggested that either mistakes had been made or someone had wanted the truth hidden. The thought was chilling. Could Amelia's disappearance have involved someone trusted? Someone powerful enough to influence the investigation? The idea hung in the room like a shadow, silent but heavy. Hayes reached out to retired officers, hoping they might remember overlooked elements. One former detective, hesitant at first, admitted he had suspected connection to a local family with influence in town. He had filed notes that were later redacted, instructions from higher-ups preventing any further inquiry. His voice was low, weary with decades of regret. "We were told to leave it alone," he said. "At the time, I know why. Now, looking back, I wonder if we should have pushed harder." His words confirmed what Hayes already feared. The trail had been deliberately obscured, and Amelia had been caught in forces beyond her family's knowledge. The Thompson family, meanwhile, watched the progress from a distance, oscillating between hope and dread. Every revelation carried emotional weight. Carol traced her fingers over old reports, recognizing fragments of her daughter's life in the descriptions, but seeing names crossed out made her blood run cold. Mark quietly cataloged dates, events, and places, attempting to construct a timeline where the official records had failed. They began to understand that the truth had always existed, fragmented and hidden, and that uncovering it might bring answers, but also pain. By the day's end, Hayes had gathered enough threads to see a path forming through the maze of redactions. The case was no longer merely a cold file. It had become a puzzle of buried secrets, a map pointing toward hidden truths. Somewhere in those shadows lay the explanation for Amelia's disappearance, and perhaps the identity of those who had kept it concealed. The investigation would continue, but one certainty remained. The secrets in the files were only the beginning, and the deeper Hayes probed, the closer she came to a revelation long delayed. The night was heavy with anticipation when Detective Hayes returned to the dimly lit interrogation room. Shadows clung to the corners, and the air smelled faintly of old coffee and paper, a reminder that time had aged a building alongside the case. The suspect sat quietly, head bowed, hands clasped in front of him, as if bracing for the weight of memories long suppressed. Hayes knew that the truth would not come in neat statements or complete sentences. It would emerge in fragments, in pauses, in the tremors of a voice held too long beneath fear and guilt. At first, the words were minimal, hesitant, almost automatic. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he murmured, eyes fixed on the table. Each syllable carried the echo of a lifetime of secrecy. Hayes leaned forward, careful not to rush, allowing the confessions to unfurl in their own rhythm. Slowly, pieces began to surface, glimpses of the events that had led to Amelia's disappearance, partial admissions of knowledge, and cryptic references to others who had been involved. It was a web of deception and fear woven over decades, but enough to guide the investigation back onto a tangible path. The Thompson family, informed of the progress, remained on the edge of a fragile hope. Carol revisited old photographs, clutching Amelia's bracelet in her hand, as if it could anchor her to reality. Mark paced the length of their living room, replaying reports, trying to reconcile the shadows of the past with the possibility of finding their daughter. They had lived with uncertainty for 22 years, yet every hesitant admission from the suspect made the invisible threads of Amelia's story take form, step by careful step. Hayes traced the details provided, cross-referencing them with the fragments of evidence rediscovered in the redacted files. Locations mentioned matched partially with forgotten witness statements. Times aligned to the patterns inferred from the bracelet's discovery. There were gaps, contradictions, and half-truths, but within the confession lay a dangerous clarity. Someone had deliberately kept Amelia hidden, and the network of complicity extended beyond the suspect alone. Each revelation was both a breakthrough and a new source of dread, revealing that the end of the mystery was still far from simple. By the close of the evening, Hayes left the suspect in the room, silent and contemplative, the partial confessions echoing in her mind. The pieces were forming a map, a path that might finally lead to Amelia. The investigation had reached a critical threshold. The truth was emerging from decades of darkness, and every fragment brought them closer to the moment that had been awaited for more than 20 years. In the Thompson home, Carol and Mark held their breath, knowing that the next step could change everything. Somewhere, Amelia's story was waiting to be completed, and the shadowed corridors of the past were finally beginning to give up their secrets. The path to Amelia was no longer a mystery of theory or fragmented evidence. It had become a journey defined by coordinates, whispered directions, and painstaking verification. Detective Hayes and her team traced the clues from the suspect's partial confessions, mapping locations that had been overlooked for decades. The abandoned warehouse, the overgrown side streets, the forgotten rural paths. Each step brought them closer to truth that had been buried under time and silence. Every movement was deliberate, measured. Years of error had taught them that haste could mean losing her again. The Thompson family followed the investigation with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Carol spent her days replaying small details she had once dismissed. The angle of shadow in the backyard, the times Amelia had asked about the woods, the fleeting visitor who had come to the house years before. Mark cataloged reports and photographs, lining them along the hallway of their home like a map of memory. Each new lead became a lifeline, each verified detail a pulse of reassurance that Amelia's story had not ended. 22 years had passed, yet the possibility of reunion made the weight of those years feel almost tangible. The investigative team moved cautiously through the designated areas. Hayes observed the environment with practiced eye. Abandoned buildings where dust floated in the shafts of light, rusted vehicles swallowed by weeds, and the remnants of everyday life left untouched for decades. Among these relics of neglect, the first clear signs emerged. Objects that had belonged to Amelia, a faded piece of clothing, small footprints in soft soil, and the faint glint of a bracelet half buried in dirt. Each discovery reinforced the trajectory of the investigation, confirming that Amelia had been held nearby, hidden from sight, yet within reach of those who had known her routines. As hours turned to evening, the team reached a secluded property, overgrown with ivy and trees that had clawed at the sides of the structure for years. It was here that the evidence converged, a place described in fragments by the confessions, hinted at in the rediscovered files, and suggested by the trajectories of overlooked leads. Hayes' heart tightened. The culmination of decades of uncertainty, fear, and hope rested behind this door. The moment carried the weight of an entire childhood stolen, and a family suspended in grief for more than 2 decades. The Thompson family waited elsewhere, unaware of the final steps being taken. Each second stretched unbearably, yet within it lay the promise that their lost daughter, their Amelia, might finally emerge. And as Hayes prepared to step across the threshold, the investigation reached its apex, a threshold between darkness and revelation, between decades of waiting and the long-awaited return of a life once vanished. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the interior of the small, dimly lit room where Amelia had spent years unseen. Detective Hayes and her team stepped carefully inside, scanning the surroundings for any immediate danger or signs of life. And then at the far corner, a figure moved, cautious, hesitant, yet unmistakably familiar. Amelia, older now yet unmistakably the little girl who had vanished 22 years ago, emerged into the light. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, met Hayes first, then shifted to the faces she'd been missing all these years. Recognition flickered, fragile but undeniable. Outside, Carol and Mark Thompson were guided to the scene, their hearts pounding with a mixture of disbelief and hope. When they first saw her, the world seemed to slow. Time, 22 years compressed into a single heartbeat, stretched into eternity as mother and daughter approached each other. Carol's hand shook as she reached out, fingertips brushing Amelia's, confirming that the years of waiting, fearing, and hoping had not been in vain. Mark followed, his voice breaking as he called her name, the simple syllables carrying the weight of decades. Amelia hesitated, unsure, then allowed herself to be drawn into the embrace she had dreamed of for so long. The reunion was quiet, punctuated only by the soft, trembling breaths of family reconnected. Amelia's expression was a mixture of relief, confusion, and a faint, lingering fear of the world she had been isolated from. She clutched the bracelet, still intact despite the years, as if it had guided her through the darkness. Hayes observed silently, noting the subtle exchanges, the longings unspoken, and emotional scars that time had etched into every movement. This was more than a return. It was the beginning of reconciling a stolen childhood with a family who had never ceased searching. As the team documented the moment, details of Amelia's life during the intervening years began to surface. Small objects, sketches, and items she had held on to told the story of survival, adaptation, and resilience. Each revelation added depth to the narrative, connecting fragments of truth uncovered in the investigation with the lived experience of the child now reunited with her parents. The past and present intertwined, a tapestry of trauma, endurance, and hope that could never be undone, but now could be understood. Even in the warmth of reunion, the shadow of unanswered questions lingered. How had she survived? Who had kept her hidden? Why had these years gone unnoticed? The investigation, though reaching its most dramatic moment, was not yet complete. The threads of secrecy, the concealed network that had sustained her absence, still demanded resolution. And as Amelia rested in her mother's arms, the quiet determination in Hayes' gaze confirmed that while one chapter closed, the final truths of the case were still waiting to emerge. The days that followed Amelia's return were quiet yet restless. Maple Street seemed both familiar and altered, each corner holding memories of a time before she vanished. The neighborhood watched, a mixture of relief and lingering unease coloring their interactions. For the Thompsons, life was no longer measured in absence, but in cautious steps toward rebuilding what had been fractured for 22 years. Amelia's presence brought joy, but it also brought shadows. Questions about the years she spent unseen, the people involved, and the truth still buried in the folds of time. Detective Hayes continued her work, piecing together the final threads of the case. Confessions, previously partial, were now cross-referenced with physical evidence and witness statements, revealing a network of deception and complicity. Some of those responsible had faded into obscurity, their names erased from public memory, while others remained silent, protected by fear or influence. Each revelation underscored the fragility of justice delayed, yet it also illuminated the perseverance of those who refused to let the story end in uncertainty. The bracelet, once a small, overlooked object, had guided them toward a path that now led to clarity, though not complete closure. Amelia herself navigated the world cautiously, relearning routines, understanding relationships, and reclaiming small pieces of her lost childhood. Each discovery was a quiet victory, recognizing the faces she had only imagined, hearing the names she had whispered to herself in isolation, and feeling the rhythm of family life she had been denied. Yet she also carried memories too heavy to speak aloud, fragment of a life marked by absence and survival, lingering in the spaces between laughter and conversation. Her eyes, once wide with uncertainty, now held both resilience and the faint shadow of fear, a reminder that even miracles bear traces of trauma. Carol and Mark Thompson, observing her tentative steps into the present, felt an intricate blend of relief, guilt, and hope. They knew the world could never erase the time lost, but they could shape the years ahead. In quiet moments, they would revisit the evidence, photographs, and confessions, reminders that while the past could not be changed, understanding it was essential for healing. The neighborhood, too, slowly absorbed the truth. The girl once vanished was home, yet the echoes of what had been endured would ripple for years to come. And so, the case closed officially, yet its resonance persisted. Justice had been pursued, mysteries partially resolved, and truths revealed, but shadows lingered in corners unseen, whispers of secrets never fully unearthed. In that tension between closure and lingering questions, Amelia's story, a testament to survival, resilience, and the enduring pursuit of truth, settled into the hearts of those who refused to let it be forgotten. Thanks for watching.